The elected president is a safeguard against the government misusing past reserves. Beyond what the government tells you, what factors would you consider before using the second key to past reserves? Your time starts now.
Unfortunately, from time to time, we're going to get crises. COVID was not the last of them. We may have major crises coming up our way. And the first thing the president has to understand is the nature of the crisis. Is this for the short term, or is this a crisis where we can't actually see the end of the crisis? We can't see the bottom to the crisis. The second key to allow for the reserves to be used is useful only where you cannot see the end of the crisis and you can't see the bottom to the crisis. But secondly, the money has to be spent wisely. And that means not just helping people to survive, which is of course very important, our firms, our SMEs and Singaporeans to survive the storm, but to build strengths in a crisis so that we emerge even stronger. That's critical to the wise use of our reserves in a crisis. But thirdly, it's got to be fair. If we're using our reserves in a crisis, if we're going to spend monies on Singaporeans and firms, it's got to be distributed fairly. So if we're saving jobs, we've got to make sure we help lower-income Singaporeans, middle-income Singaporeans, build up strengths for the recovery, build up new skills, new capabilities for the recovery. Don't just favor the big firms, don't just favor those who already have it good. Be fair.
Thank you, Mr. Tharman. Mr. Tan, you are next, and your time starts now.
The two key factors. I have two factors. The first is this use of the reserve in the interest of the people? And the second factor I will consider is this a proper use of the reserves? For example, is it spent unwisely or is it spent wisely? For example, our biggest use of past reserves was during the COVID. A large sum of money was set aside. And there was some part of the money that went into banks that were making huge profits, and they were given subsidy by the government. I consider that to be not suitable use of the reserves. And I don't want to say that this is looking back at the benefit of hindsight. I think the president should have the ability to understand what is proper use and what is the wrong use of the reserve. So I will certainly want to examine carefully, is this good for the people and is this the proper use of the reserves? Thank you.
Do you have anything else to add?
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tan. Mr. Ng, it's your turn now, and your time starts now.
What other factors, should I consider when the government makes a request to draw on our past reserves? I think the critical thing is to understand that our past reserves should benefit present generations of Singaporeans as well as future generations. So how much to save and how much to spend is a very important decision. So I would like to know from the government, what is the total size of our reserves? How much are you asking to spend out of the reserves? What are the assumptions that the government is making regarding the crisis? Is it an international crisis, a domestic crisis? How long do you expect the crisis to last? Another question which I would ask is, have you exhausted the possibility of raising revenues from other areas before asking me, the president, for permission to draw on the past reserves? And also, quite importantly, I think we need to understand what are the assumptions that the government is using in regard to what are the expected returns on our reserves for the future. How does that compare with our historical rates of return on the reserves? So these are issues which I have been quite familiar with while working at the GIC.